Hey, I just wanted to address something that it's been a couple of days since I made a video, so there's something I wanted to address that comes up often, and I find it annoying and I find it unhelpful, and so I'm just going to talk about it. And that is the notion of good people, conservative people that have a lot of right ideas, right as in correct, not right as in not left. And I say that because that's kind of what I'm talking about. So you have a lot of people who have, correct ideas, and they constantly point fingers at the left. And this is just unhelpful because um, it demonstrates an extremely incomplete view at best. Um, I grew up in a conservative household. I grew up in a conservative part of the country. For the first couple of decades of my life, I would have told you that I was a Republican. I came from a Republican household. Um, I might have even told you that I would find it hard, as I was growing up, to find any Democratic candidates that I might agree with to a great extent, unless you looked at some of your Democrats from like an older generation. So I would have grown up in the kind of the 80s and the 90s. So by the time that I would have been old enough to even care about politics at all, this would have been mid to late 90s, and even then I would have still been extremely young. You're talking about, I went to high school in the mid 90s. Um, So even then, I mean, let's be honest. If you're in high school, your understanding of politics is superficial at best. For most undergrads, understanding of politics is maybe a little more in depth if they really take an interest into it. But up until I was in my late 20s, I would have told you that I was a Republican. I would have been, a very conservative person who would have found it hard, at least politically, to align myself with a lot of what Democrats were saying on significant issues, with some exceptions, primarily those of an older generation, your older generation Democrats. Um, I still to this day find myself in alignment with far more Republicans than Democrats, but I would never consider myself a Republican. I have not called myself a Republican in 15 years, 16 years, since 2007, since I kind of started to realize that the political parties are, um, the construct of Republicans and Democrats in this country is a dialectical smokescreen, and it's been a dialectical smokescreen for a very long time. Um, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. And the problem with not recognizing that is it keeps people in this construct um, of opposition, where people who are conservative, or that call themselves Republicans, are constantly pointing their fingers at Democrats or those who are left leaning, and vice versa. Now, I will tell you that I find a lot of what the left does to be extremely problematic, like existentially problematic, far worse in general terms than what the right does. But I think that's by design. And I don't necessarily I don't necessarily buy, however, that the left is worse than the right, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. Um, but this dialectical construct is so apparent, and yet I don't understand how people still fall for it. So when I hear people in the news, and I don't even watch mainstream news, but if somehow I come across a clip or somebody sends something to me, or I hear a politician, someone on the right, someone who I may even agree with, to some extent, maybe even a significant extent. As soon as they start bashing the left, I realize they are either A, just playing politics, in which case I should just tune out because they're not saying anything important, or B, they don't know. And there are plenty of people like that. I mean, I think plenty of my assumption. I mean, I could be wrong, of course. I don't personally know any senators or congressmen, but I think many of them don't know. They don't know the game. Now, they may understand the game in terms of like the bureaucratic machinations that go on in Washington. They may not understand what's actually. They may not understand the undercurrents of that, though. You know, and I'm sure if I were to meet one of them, they would tell me how much I don't understand what goes on the Hill, etc. And yeah, I'm sure in terms of the day-to-day bureaucracy, I don't. For sure, I got it. You know, I'm not here to assert that I have a greater understanding about that stuff than I do. I'm sure I don't, but I'm also sure that it doesn't matter. That the day-to-day bureaucracy stuff, none of that matters. None of that matters. And the left to right paradigm, that's a flawed perspective. I mean, it just is. Why? Because both sides are completely controlled. That's just the way that it is. So if you're on the right and you're somebody who I largely agree with, but you start pointing fingers at the left because they're the left, that just means nothing to me. Now you can point fingers at what they're doing. You can point fingers at their policies, but stop calling it the left. They have a script to follow, just like the right does. They just happen to be different scripts. And my assumption is there's a huge, kind of Overton window at play here, where if you don't know what the Overton window is, look it up. But anyway, you try and shift the general perspective of the public by shifting the window of what the public finds acceptable and what the public finds ludicrous. So if you have the left, which just supports things that are ridiculous, and then the right supports things that aren't nearly that ridiculous, but they should be unacceptable, people will find that acceptable because they at least aren't as far afield as what the left is supporting. And so you've just shifted the Overton window, or the window of what people find acceptable. And I think that's largely what is at play here. But each side has their script, and a lot of people that they don't know this. A lot of your congressmen, probably your senators, I mean, a lot of them are completely clueless to this. They don't know how the United States works. They don't understand history. They have no concept strategically of what is going on in the world any more than anybody else. They just happen to get elected. They got elected again by uninformed people. So you have uninformed people who are perhaps politically savvy in terms of getting elected. They get elected by masses of uninformed people. They go to the Hill. They may learn a lot in terms of the political machinations as to how DC runs, but they don't understand what's actually going on in the government, Anyway, so, or how the government runs, or how the world works, and they just don't, Now some do. I think some of the top completely do, and they're just completely evil. They are. I mean, this is far beyond just bureaucratic corruption. They are evil. I mean, I think there are people in our government who are absolutely evil. And I said before, I don't even necessarily know that the left is worse than the right. Okay, what do I mean by that? I think their policies are worse, but I think the right, because of that, is more deceptive. So there's a kind of a political analyst that I used to read for years. I mean, kind of since I started looking at all this stuff, right? So I mean, I've probably read a lot of stuff that he's written, or I've seen interviews that he's done over the last 15 plus years. And that's Joel Skousen. And I used to read him a lot, kind of in 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010. He puts out a brief each week. And I still pretty much check it out, like every week. And I've probably read that most every week when he puts it out for 15 years. Now, I don't follow it as rigidly, or maybe accept it as much as I did, a decade or so ago. a decade to a decade and a half ago. Um, and there are some perspectives that he has that I strongly disagree with. But there are a lot of ways in which I think he has some good commentary. But there's something that he said years and years and years ago that kind of helped me as I was waking up to this and kind of getting outside of that left-right dialectic. And Joel Skousen said, you know, the Republicans a lot of times can do more damage than the Democrats because well-meaning conservative people will buy it when a Republican does it. And I think that's completely true because I have friends of mine who are good people, but they are duped as hell, you know? And if it comes from a Republican, then they either assume it's good, they assume it makes sense, or they assume it's necessary, or they assume, yeah, but you know what? We have to do this because we're fighting against, the left or the Democrats. Not helpful. I do believe we should fight bad policies. I do believe the left comes up with more bad policies than the right. That's true. But this deception that comes from following the right because, oh, we're conservative and they're conservative. First of all, most Republicans in government are not conservative, or they're like conserving the wrong things. They're conserving the rampant corruption and frankly, evil that is seeped into our country for over the last, I don't know, how far back do you want to go? Century and a half. I mean, earlier than that. I mean, it just depends on who you ask and who we're talking about. I mean, I think America's had problems since the very beginning. I think we've had agents of destruction that have been around since the beginning. Yeah, anyway, I was about to name a name, but I decided against it. Yeah, but I'll just say it. Like, I'm not a fan of Alexander Hamilton. Oh, there's a musical. Oh my God, Alexander Hamilton. Yeah, I mean, I'm just not a fan of Alexander Hamilton. I think his view was super destructive and has caused a lot of problems. And even people who don't like him, and their claims as to how bad he was, I think he's probably worse. Anyway, that's kind of neither here nor there. My point is that there have been powerful people in powerful positions for a very, very long time. And the United States has widely departed from the path that it may have been on it at some point. So when this dialectic or this construct of oppositions, which can happen organically, but what I'm referring to is not. It's a fabricated dialectic, which means whoever is ultimately trying to consolidate power around the world, which means they control the United States government, and they've controlled the United States government for a very, very, very long time. I don't believe any of our elections have been fair for, I don't know, a long time. I mean, a century, more than a century. I don't know. So just merely putting in a new president is not, I mean, it's just not going to change things. In theory, it could be a good start, like I'll grant you that. I've written on my Substack how with the 2024 election, I take a thematic approach to it. There are themes that will be discussed, and those conversations will be important. I'm less concerned about the personalities, if you will, most of whom I would never vote for. There's not a single Republican candidate that I would vote for. Not a single one. There are some that I think are less bad than others. But there's not a single Republican candidate, unless there are some out there that are maybe there's some smaller candidates out there that don't have a big following that I just don't know enough about. Okay. But the ones who are big names, no, I mean, no, come on, get out of here. I'm not gonna, who? Come on. So yeah, so even somebody who largely identifies like far more with Republicans than Democrats. Yeah, I mean, there's not a single Republican candidate. Like, I didn't watch the Republican debate a week or two ago. No, I didn't watch it. I mean, I caught some highlights from it, but I didn't even go seek those. I just came across them because they were just kind of, they were just out there. And I'd come across little clips of things that people said or whatever. Um, but my my perspective of where the federal government is at leads me to believe that we need sweeping changes, far more than what a single president can achieve. And if you want to talk about another what I would say another fabricated dialectic that a lot of people fall for, in my view, now I could be wrong on this. I'm not wrong on the Republicans and Democrats thing. I mean, come on. I mean, seriously. But on the larger international kind of global dialectic that I think is at play, I on anything I reserve the right to be wrong and to refine my opinion as I come across more information or think about it more or whatever. But I mean, come on, the Republican Democrat thing, this is like, it's just so obvious. I just don't understand how people still fall for it. Like, stop listening to senators and congressmen that happen to be Republicans that are complaining about the left. Nobody in the Senate or in the House is doing a damn thing to fix this country. Not a single one of them. Not a single one of them. There are some of them that have done a few small things that have been good. I can't think of a single one that, on the whole, when you take everything that has happened during their tenure, and I realize some of them just got into office, but I can't think of a single one that has been a courageous representative of either the states, in case of the Senate, or the people, in the case of the House. Can't think of a single one. There are some that are better than others, and I mean, you can almost count them on one hand. And then the others are just, I mean, they're just terrible. But I don't think a single one of them has been as courageous as we need. Not a single one of them. If you disagree with that, you can let me know in the comments, and you can tell me who you think has done some great things. And you might name some people in which I will agree on this issue, this person was good. But on these issues, this person was completely out to lunch, or they were kind of a no-show when it came to that issue, or they're not going near far enough, or they're they're hacking at the leaves, but nobody's interested in getting to the root of the problem. And when it comes to our failing republic, and we are, like, the United States is in a state of collapse. Now, is it going to collapse? I don't know. But right now, I don't see Americans being interested enough to keep it from collapsing. I see small numbers of people that are very interested, and I see a lot of apathy. Yeah, I guess I would say that. I mean, I think yeah, I mean, I guess people are apathetic. I mean, I guess that is the right word. I'm trying to be nicer to my fellow Americans, because I feel like I rag on people too much. I feel like I rag on too many people too much, but I also think that's kind of necessary. So I see a lot of apathetic masses, and that's not how we're going to, fix the country. That's just not how it's going to happen. So I just don't necessarily think that we've had a lot of senators or congressmen just really do a whole lot for us. That's my opinion. But the larger dialectic that I started to mention is the one that's happening on a global scale. So I personally do, just like I don't like it when people point the finger at the left because I don't think they are addressing the real problem. I'm a little wary when people point the finger at Russia or China, or to a lesser degree, people point the finger at Iran or North Korea, etc. I'm not saying that those countries are good. And again, most people can't think in complexities. So, like, if you don't condemn those countries outright, oh, you must be a supporter of Putin or whatever. Because again, nobody, people just fall for these dialectical traps so easily. Largely because they are steered into them by the media. But again, the media is completely controlled. Like, how do people not understand this? So I personally, like, I'm not a fan of Putin. I do kind of like some things that Putin has done. I personally, and I reserve the right to be wrong on this, and I'll change my opinion accordingly. I don't think Putin is a real, devout Christian. I think Russia is a Christian nation. I mean, it's been a Christian nation for 1,000 years, and I don't know that 70 or 75 years of Bolshevism can uproot 1,000 years of culture. So I will grant to you that culturally, traditionally, a lot of that stuff has probably started to come back, and that Russia is probably a Christian nation. I mean, I know there's plenty of other stuff going on in Russia as well. But I think my assumption is that Putin's Christianity is a show, as much for his people as for the West. So when he critiques the West for our failings, I think he's correct in those critiques. And he may couch his critique within a veneer of Christianity. I just think that's fake. I think that's for show. I could be wrong. Maybe he is a devout Orthodox Christian. My assumption is he's not. My assumption is that Putin is also completely controlled by the same people that are controlling the West. My assumption is that China is controlled by the same people that are controlling the West. Who financed the Soviet Union? The West. Who largely injected capital into China? I mean, the West. I mean, look at the history of, what happened with Chiang Kai-shek, who eventually leaves mainland China during the Chinese Civil War. He's got to go off to a nearby island called Formosa. We now call it Taiwan, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is beyond the scope of this, what was supposed to be a short video. But my point is, and again, I'm very open to other interpretations. But for me, what's going on in Ukraine, at least in terms of the two sides, is dialectical theater, in my opinion. Now, it's not theater in that the battles over there are not really happening. I'm not saying that. I think people are dying, and that's incredibly tragic. And my heart goes out to the people on both sides. So soldiers that are fighting on both sides, and people that are being affected. So you've got Ukraine is being ravaged. You've got Ukrainian soldiers and Russian soldiers that are being killed, being wounded, and I find that incredibly tragic. But I think there's a lot more going on that we're not hearing about, and this is my opinion, and I think about this all the time, and I could absolutely be wrong. But my opinion is that Russia, and when I say Russia, I really mean like Putin, is not resisting, what some people would call the New World Order, if you want to use that term. I think he's part of it. I think he is following a script, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know exactly what's going on. These are all assumptions on my part. But my assumption is that he is playing out a role that he has been given, and that he was either asked or he was given the green light to go into Ukraine a year and a half ago, which, oh, by the way, I didn't think he was going to do. I was kind of wrong on that. But that doesn't, but just because I didn't necessarily think that, well, I guess as maybe as it got closer, you know, um, I was aware of what was going on in Ukraine like over the last decade. Um, so before the invasion occurred, um, I I think a lot of people, myself included, were thinking, this is just kind of more of the same. What why would anything be any different, this time around? Now, maybe just before the invasion occurred, maybe there were some indicators that were different or whatever. We could quibble about that, but just in the abstract, aside from maybe like right beforehand or whatever, um, I think some people, myself included, were fooled in terms of like why would Russia go into Ukraine? Um, but the fact that they did, and I didn't think they would, doesn't change my overall perspective on what I think Russia's doing and what I think Russia's role is. And kind of the same with China. Again, I think it's a big dialectic. Now, there may be a big war. I certainly hope there's not. There may be. But if there's a big war between the West on one side and Russia and China and their allies on the other, it will be because, the globalist controllers want this war for whatever reason, you know. I do think that they have a lot more power. These global controllers have a lot more power than the average American wants to concede that they have. And that's a problem, because until we realize the scope of the problem, we're not going to be able to fix it, you know? Now, I talk a lot about the spiritual aspect because I do believe that fundamentally this is spiritual. But that doesn't mean that it's not also physical. That does not mean that it's not also military, economic, legal, political. There are all these modalities through which this war can manifest itself, for sure. But fundamentally, our true enemy is not Democrats. If we're talking domestically, they sometimes, well, it's not the Democrats, and it's not Russia, and it's not China. Okay. Now, we may go to war and we may end up like fighting them, and they may end up fighting us, which is incredibly tragic because the enemy of the Chinese people is the same enemy of the American people, and our leaders are following the marching orders that they get from these global controllers, who is our real enemy and who I do believe are evil. I don't care if, that sounds kooky. I just don't care about that. I don't care about uninformed people who still subscribe to ideas that are just so utterly ridiculous in the face of everything we've been through in the last couple of years. People have got to realize that their old worldview is either entirely inaccurate or, at best, woefully incomplete. People just need to realize that. So, to recap, it's not the left. The left is playing a role. The right is playing a role. This video, kind of my intended audience for this, is kind of those who are on the right and are more conservative minded. I think a lot of people in America who are captured by the far left are past hope. I just think they are. If they're not, then great. More moderate people on the left, I think many of those are waking up. They feel left behind by the Democrat Party. Many people who might have considered themselves to be Democrats, even as recently as maybe, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, are probably now feeling like if they are sensible and rational They probably feel like the Democrat Party has left them behind. You know, some of those more moderate leftists. So anybody who is conservative minded, those are kind of people that I'm talking to. Stop blaming the left. Now, you can attack policies that are ridiculous, but you should be attacking policies that are ridiculous regardless of who they come from. But stop coagulating around these figures on the right, many of whom are probably being offered as carefully crafted demagogues to keep people confused or to entrap people into following policies that come from a person that people trust, but that they should not trust. There's a lot of deception out there, and we've all got to be careful. So just when people are telling you who you should be pointing fingers at, just be very, very, very careful. Try to get, above this dialectical nonsense where people just want to point fingers at the left, and people on the left do it to the right too, and it's no better. I hear a lot of talk about Russia and China, and they are enemies. They're adversaries of ours, and and have been, but not really, like not fundamentally. They're as I said before, the enemy of the Russian people, the enemy of the Chinese people is the same enemy that we have here. And if we all realize that our enemy are these global controllers that are manipulating both sides of the chessboard, we'd be a lot better off because we would at least recognize the enemy and we could focus our efforts there. So don't fall into those traps. Now, I realize, because people are gonna listen to this or whatever, and they're gonna come at me and they're gonna say, "Are you saying China is not an enemy?" That's not exactly what I'm saying. I'm not saying China is not a threat. Come on, I was in the military for a long time. I literally said a couple of minutes ago, it is conceivable there could be a big war. But if there's a big war, it's not because China decided there's going to be a war. It's not because Russia decided there's going to be a war. It's not because North Korea decided. It's not because Iran decided. It's not even because we decided. Joe Biden is making no decisions. If there's going to be a big war, it's because they decided. Whoever these global controllers are, I don't know who they are, but I do believe they control both sides. And if you want to present evidence that that's not true, I'm open to it. Because I could be wrong. But people who think that, Putin is this Christian man from a Christian nation who is fighting the evil West, no, I may grant you that Russia as a nation has a lot of Christian traditions that I think are positive. I don't think all their traditions are positive. I think those are. And like I said, 70 to 75 years of the Soviet Union probably can't undo 1,000 years of Christianity. That's good. But I think Putin is wearing a cloak of Christianity. That is my opinion. And I think he is playing a role. Now, he may be playing it very well, and maybe he's fooled a lot of people. That's my opinion. Maybe I'm the one who's wrong, But anyway, so I think they are trying to give us leaders to follow. And because there's a natural tendency for people to follow leaders, people are quick to accept one. And we should probably be a little bit more deliberate in questioning why they want us to criticize those that they tell us to criticize, or why they want us to accept those they tell us to accept. And I think that's all I got for now.